Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. You're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Another day brought another deadly Russian attack on Ukraine, resulting in 5 people dead and many more injured. Later in the program, we will discuss the latest developments in Ukraine with our correspondent, Oz Kataji. More on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Head of the European Commission announces Europe will be ready for tough negotiations with the U.S. Donald Trump suggests Ukraine should trade rare minerals for support guarantees. Polish runner successfully completes a 3,000-mile run through the U.S. The EU will be ready for tough negotiations with the U.S. That's according to the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It comes a day after Europe's leaders met in Brussels for an informal summit to address defense and how to deal with Trump's White House. Sasha Farbach reports.
There's a lot at stake between the United States and the EU. With careful wording, the head of the European Commission gave a sign of how the 27-nation bloc may proceed.
We discussed ways to strengthen a very pragmatic cooperation with the United States. There are clearly new challenges and growing uncertainties, so the European Union is prepared for a robust but constructive dialogue with the United States.
Donald John Trump.
As the U.S. threatens the world with tariffs, it is Washington's allies who may feel the brunt of it. In an informal gathering in Brussels, EU leaders tried to take a unified front against the mercurial resident in the Oval Office. Poland's prime minister called it a cruel paradox that at a time of great dangers in the world, allies would split apart.
The United States is our friend, so we need no aggression, no unnecessary gestures, but we need to respect ourselves and we must respond adequately.
President Trump is holding to the ethos of his America First strategy. So far, he has mostly ruffled the feathers of his allies, demanding Greenland, as well as threatening tariffs against Canada and potentially the European Union. Talking to TVP World, Commissioner Séjourné urged restraint, but also sent a signal to the United States.
For now, the discussions are still very vague, and there remains uncertainty about the scope of what the United States and the new administration might propose in the coming weeks. So I still urge all European leaders to hold back, in a way, but above all, to prepare. We are preparing with both defensive and offensive tools.
The Brussels summit was originally supposed to focus on defense, but other topics also rose with the fraught nature of the last weeks, including shoring up support for Denmark's sovereignty with Greenland. The Danish Prime Minister reiterated that Trump's expectation of a deal was unlikely.
Greenland is today a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It's a part of our territory, and it's not for sale.
This was the first time this year that all EU leaders of the 27-nation bloc gathered. Notable was also the attendance of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, a sign of more cooperation to come.
There is a rekindling of the European Union relations with the United Kingdom. There is an interest both in London and Brussels to work more together on protecting the security and defense of the continent and also supporting Ukraine.
The United States and EU remain important trade and security partners. Although Trump's erratic style has EU leaders worried, experts believe Europeans may need to do more if the U.S. disengages in the future.
Europe will have to carry more on the gap that the American disengagement will let in our security, and that means that we'll have to invest more on defense, working more together in producing more faster and defense industrial market capable of covering the necessity of our continents, but also of Ukraine.
Europe and the U.S. share a long history of partnership, but the EU is signaling that it is prepared to stand up for its interests. Only rivals would benefit from any rift between friends.
When targeted, unfairly or arbitrarily, the European Union will respond firmly.
There are no winners in trade wars. If the United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China. We are very interlinked.
The last weeks have shown that the messaging from the White House can be very conflicting. It will require more unity and action on the part of the Europeans. The EU will need to deliver. Time will tell if it can turn words into meaningful results. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
We're not discussing if anymore, we're discussing how, said European Council President Antonio Costa as EU leaders discuss the possible financing of defense projects by the EU. Warsaw says its project, which includes strengthening its eastern border, found appreciation among the leaders gathered at the informal EU summit in Brussels. Our defense correspondent, Marek Steele, has a story.
European and NATO leaders are in agreement. Defense spending needs to be raised.
She will decide on the new defense spending pledge, but it will be considerably higher than 2%, I can assure you.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte took part in Monday's informal EU summit, which focused on defense. The summit was also attended by the British Prime Minister, who joined EU heads of state for the first time since Brexit.
Obviously, it's a wider question of the reset between the EU and the UK, where we want to make progress. But starting with defence and security this evening is very, very important for our interest.
The EU and NATO's European member states face growing pressure to boost their military spending as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues and as expectations grow from the United States to increase military investments.
The intentions of all 27 on the need to speed up work on arming Europe, on making Europe more secure, were very encouraging.
According to Polish officials, some of Warsaw's ideas, such as this border reinforcement project called East Shield, have already been acclaimed.
Poland's efforts to protect the eastern border of the European Union, that is the so-called East Shield, the need to finance and to support this project, found appreciation today among all leaders. As for the second initiative, that of Prime Minister Tusk and the Prime Minister of Greece, the Iron Dome over Europe or integrated air defense. If Europe is to be integrated in something, it is in air defense, so that our people are safe. And it has been positively received as well.
European Union leaders agreed on several critical gaps and where there is a clear EU added value, and these include air and missile defense, missiles and ammunition, and military mobility. But some experts say that funds may be the EU's strongest card.
The European Union can serve as a great platform in order to help European NATO members to procure together. The European Union can also help simplify legislation and help with military mobility.
European Commission Vice President Stéphane Séjourné, who spoke to TVP World on Monday, said that in light of Europe taking more responsibility for its security, the role of the United States should not be diminished.
We must keep them as allies. NATO is still the Europeans' primary lifeline at this stage. Being together in the Atlantic Alliance, we now need to build the second lifeline, which is a European defense strategy. It's a political goal in itself, but we must preserve this alliance with our American partners.
Experts say that in the event that the US will limit its role in NATO, European allied nations will need separate command structures and planning facilities.
Do we have things like strategic enablers? Do we have the air defense? Do we have the strategic airlift? Do we have the refueling capacity? Do we have the nuclear deterrent capacity to act independently of the United States? Those are the questions.
NATO's four frontline nations, Poland and the Baltic states, have recently called on the EU to allocate 100 billion euros for defense. The four countries want the EU to use joint borrowing and allow the European Investment Bank to spend money on defense needs. They also want Brussels to open up cooperation with European partners beyond the bloc, which likely means the United Kingdom.
5 people have been killed and dozens wounded in a Russian missile strike on the northern Ukrainian city of Izium. Joining us live from Kyiv with more is our Ukraine correspondent Oz Katerji. Good evening, Oz. So what more do we know about this deadly attack?
Yeah, a shocking attack on Izium. That's in the region of Kharkiv in the north of Ukraine. 5 people dead, among them a pregnant woman. And 55 others wounded, including 3 children who are seriously wounded in this attack. That's according to the regional governor, Ole Sinyebov. Now, this attack targeted what he says there were no military targets in the area, just damaged residential buildings and regional administrative buildings. So a huge loss of life there. Work is still underway, picking through the rubble in what is another shocking Russian missile attack on
Ukrainian civilians. It was a ballistic missile said to be targeting the center of the city. Now, elsewhere in Russia, Ukraine has continued to target Russian oil facilities across the country with an attack on Monday in Volgograd. TVP World took an investigation into those attacks. Let's listen in now.
Ukraine struck a Russian oil refinery in the southern Volgograd region in the early hours of Monday morning, alongside another attack on Russian energy infrastructure in the Astrakhan region, marking another steady escalation in Kiev's campaign to degrade Moscow's oil production capabilities. Ukraine's attack on Monday on oil facilities was the second in under 4 days, having also struck a Lukoil plant on Friday the 31st of January in another drone attack. Kiev has singled out Russian oil production as one of the critical resources Moscow needs to keep its war in Ukraine ongoing, and began systematically targeting Russian oil production facilities in 2022, with the number of attacks steadily increasing year on year. Analysis provided by the Russian investigative media outlet Meduza shows that Ukraine attacked Russian oil facilities inside Russia at least 81 times in 2024 alone, although the frequency of those attacks had declined in the second half of the year. In March 2024, the Financial Times reported that the Biden administration had pressured Ukraine to halt attacks on Russian oil facilities, after warning Kyiv that the attacks risked driving up global oil prices.
It seems to me that to really understand how to survive in Kharkiv, how people are living with no electricity or water, people probably need to come and see and then condemn something or not. Russia understands nothing but force.
A map of the facilities hit inside Russia over the last 3 years shows the scale of Ukraine's campaign and of the range of the domestically produced armed, unmanned aerial vehicles Kyiv is using to degrade Russia's oil production capacity. Analysis undertaken by Reuters shows that Ukraine's campaign has begun to have an impact on Russia's oil economy, with data showing that Russia's production capabilities fell by at least 12% in 2024, something Kyiv is keen to continue exploiting in 2025. For their part, the Russians are struggling to stop Ukraine's attacks, with their air defenses failing to stop large Ukrainian drone swarms from hitting their targets.
Rare earth metals in exchange for continuous support. That's the deal Donald Trump has suggested Ukraine and the U.S. should clinch. While Ukraine is in fact a resource-rich country, it remains uncertain to what extent Donald Trump was serious. More from Piotr Miszczuk.
Rare earth metals, or simply rare earths, are a group of 17 difficult-to-extract elements that are highly sought after by global powers. Now the elements have come to the attention of Donald Trump, who would like to tap into Ukraine's deposits of those.
We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment.
He didn't wait long for a response from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said he's open to a closer partnership with the US and stressed that this is something he and Trump discussed when they met in September.
I told him that we would be open. We are open to American companies' investments, and with pleasure. Why? Because if all this is under Russia's control, other countries, other companies will directly enter there. I am confident, including Iran and North Korea.
It is unclear whether Trump strictly referred to the rare earths or whether he used it as an umbrella term for all critical minerals. What is clear, however, is that Ukraine abounds in crucial resources. Alongside rare earths, the country boasts the largest lithium and titanium deposits in all of Europe, but most are located in Russian-occupied territory. Interest in Ukrainian riches was already evinced last year by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham in an interview with Fox News.
But do you know that the richest country in all of Europe for rare earth minerals is Ukraine? $2 to $7 trillion worth of minerals that are rare earth minerals. Very relevant to the 21st century. Ukraine's ready to make a deal with us, not the Russians.
Moscow has seized this opportunity to say the US should pull the plug on assistance for Ukraine.
In other words, it's a proposal to buy aid, meaning not to continue to provide it free of charge or otherwise, but to provide it on a commercial basis. It is better, of course, not to provide aid at all, thus contributing to the end of this conflict.
Though it's difficult to fully assess the worth of Ukrainian deposits, with the total value of minerals estimated at up to $15 trillion, rare earths are of crucial importance for technology, energy and defense. According to Andrzej Jagielski, spokesman for the Polish Geological Institute, rare earth metals can turn the tide of history.
Just ordinary magnetized metal everyone knows and is able to separate, whereas here, in these bolts, I have two metals glued together. Just a magnet with a pinch of neodymium, so-called neodymium magnets, which two grown men are not able to pull apart like that. And this is just an example that illustrates what these metals change.
The rare earth metals are believed to be able to upend the current global hierarchy, giving edge to countries at the forefront of rare earths use. Global powers are vying to get their hands on the sparsely distributed elements, which might explain Trump's other recent moves concerning a potential acquisition of Greenland.
China, in the area we call Inner Mongolia, is believed to have accumulated there an estimated 1/3 of the resources known on Earth. Greenland also has 1/3.
With a plethora of statements from Donald Trump, one can't be certain about how serious he is as regards Ukrainian natural resources. What is important, however, is that for the first time Trump has laid down a condition under which the US might continue to finance Ukraine's defensive effort against the ongoing Russian invasion.
Thousands of miles covered on foot, more than 100 days on the road from New York to San Diego. That's not the plot of a movie. It's the real-life journey of a man whom some have called the Polish Forrest Gump. Anastasia Janchenko shares his story.
This is Tomasz Sobania. He has just completed a cross-country run spanning over 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles from the bustling metropolis of New York to San Diego on the Pacific coast. Along the way, Tomasz visited the White House and the political heart of Washington, D.C. He made his way to Chicago and embarked on a journey down America's famous Route 66, running all the way to sunny Los Angeles, before turning south to cross the long-awaited finish line of his crazy American adventure in San Diego, covering a distance equal to 125 marathons.
I think my mind needs a lot of rest now because there was so much pressure, so much struggle and, worrying about what's going to happen and what's going on, traveling for 5 months across country, across the United States, running. So I feel relieved at some point also and happy because it happened, but I just can't wait to have some rest.
The marathon wasn't easy. Tomasz wore out 30 pairs of shoes, running almost non-stop across the country. He said that he took just one rest day during his entire journey, stopping in Chicago.
Even, to motivate myself for so many months, there were moments when I really didn't have any power left. After motivating and fighting for 2 or 3 months, I had no power left, and I still had to run for the next months. And I think that's why this was the hardest thing I've ever done.
During his marathon adventure, Tomasz also took part in various charity events and even helped his fellow countrymen in need, a Polish family that had lost their home in the Los Angeles wildfires. Tomasz Sobania had already completed several extraordinary long-distance runs before taking on this challenge. In June 2023, he ran from southern Poland to the Greek town of Marathon and back, covering 3,600 kilometers. In 2021, he ran from Poland to Rome, raising nearly 12,000 euros for a young girl who had been diagnosed with cancer. What new adventures will Poland's Forrest Gump embark on next? Tomasz says he doesn't have anything specific in mind just yet, but he's sure that even greater challenges lie ahead.
Emotions are running high after a recent tariff announcement by Donald Trump. Dubbed by many as an unnecessary start to a trade war, the 25% tariff for Canada in particular, one of U.S.'s closest allies and importers, created a rift between the two countries and could further strain not only their economic but also diplomatic relations. In light of those events, could Canada get closer to the EU? Joining me now is Roland Paris, professor of international affairs, University of Ottawa, and former advisor to Canada's Prime Minister. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
In their latest article, The Economist said, I quote, "Europe needs space and resources, Canada needs people. Let's deal." Is there a realistic chance that Canada at any point in time could join the EU?
I think it's very unlikely that Canada would become a member of the EU, but there's no question that part of the effects of having been targeted by Donald Trump's economic attack is that in Canada, there almost certainly will be a big push to try to deepen and expand Canada's trade relationships outside of North America. And Europe is already a very important trading partner for Canada, and I would expect that there'll be a push to try and expand Canadian exports to Europe, including energy and resources.
So could you elaborate on that? Because if not the membership, and we're looking at this tightening of the trade ties, which ones would those be, especially in case of energy?
Well, Canada can't detach itself from North America, nor would it want to. Its top priority is to resume cooperative relations with the United States, because the economic relationship and the political relationship and even the people-to-people relationship is so deep. This, isn't going to disappear overnight. Certainly, that's Canada's top priority. But when it comes to exporting more from Canada, there's two challenges. One is, of course, to identify the partners, and we already have extensive negotiations taking place in the Indo-Pacific region. We're members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and in Europe, we have the CETA. And so those are fantastic platforms to build on. The other challenge for Canada is to build more infrastructure in order to move more of our resources to those markets.
But do you think that Canada has gone beyond the point of no return when it comes to the relationship with the U.S., or is there still some space for discussion?
Oh, there's absolutely space for discussion. I mean, there are plenty of people within the U.S. Political system that continue to value the relationship with Canada, and there are plenty of companies in the United States, including many that were speaking up when Trump was threatening his 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, that urged him not to do so. So, the relationship has taken a pretty serious hit, and there has been a loss of some trust. But it's much too deep a relationship to think that it's been disrupted for good. And I would expect that there'll be efforts to try and find ways to work with the Trump White House, and perhaps as his attention turns to other issues in other parts of the world.
We've heard about the tariffs, 25% for Canada, 25% for Mexico, and 10% for China. We've also heard from President Donald Trump saying that Europe is going to be next. We are Europe is expecting some tariffs. But do you think that Canada could actually fill out some gaps if the U.S.-EU relationship was to worsen? And what actually both of these sides bilaterally have to offer each other?
Well, I think that if we got to a point where both the EU and Canada were subject to, really punishing tariffs by the United States, then I think that there would be a real conversation to have about how the EU and Canada can work together to think about how to deal with that challenge and how to try to overcome that kind of serious impediment to both of their economies. But, in the near term, we all just have to remember that Donald Trump, he doesn't think about the world in terms of friends or adversaries. Everything is a deal. I presumably thought that threatening these tariffs against Canada would put him in a better negotiating position what it ended up doing was stimulating a nationalist response in Canada and really making Canadians very determined to resist what they interpreted as an attack on Canada's economy and sovereignty.
If Canada was to focus more on cooperation with Europe and with the situation with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine and with defense issues that the EU is dealing, do you think that Canada could actually provide more support to the European Union and aid for Ukraine?
Well, Canada already provides an enormous amount of financial support for Ukraine and and also a significant amount of military support, although we have less material to give to the effort. So,
but I mean, taking an
Canada is already taking an extra step. Well, right now, there's a great deal of attention right now on the possibility of a body blow to the Canadian economy, and if there were to be 25% tariffs leveled against Canada, then this would be an economic emergency. I think that Canada will absolutely continue to support Ukraine politically, financially, militarily, and maintain our support for NATO and increase military spending. That's going to happen. But I think a lot of the attention will be on the very dire economic implications of 25% tariffs on Canadian exports to the United States and trying to deal with that crisis, should it happen.
What lessons do you think that the EU can learn from Canada when it comes to that announcement about the tariffs and the international relations and the foreign policy by the US?
Well, it's really hard to draw many lessons from interactions with Donald Trump because he's so unpredictable. And he can react to things that other leaders might not react to and ignore things that other leaders might not ignore. But I think that one thing that happened here was that Donald Trump was not just threatening and went right to the very last moment to implement 25% sanctions, tariffs against Canadian imports. He was also linking that to saying over and over again that he thought that Canada should be the 51st state and that maybe he would use economic force to try and bring it about. And so I think the lesson here is stand firm because that's what Canada did. And in the end, President Trump decided to push these tariffs off by another month.
When we're looking at the domestic side of what's happening in Canada right now, we know that Justin Trudeau is still in office, but we are nearing the parliamentary elections. What are the leadership trends when it comes to the current ruling party ahead of the vote, which is supposed to be cast?
Yeah, so the election will happen sometime this year. We don't know exactly when. There is right now a process for selecting a new leader for the Liberal Party. That's Justin Trudeau's party. He said he will resign as Prime Minister as soon as there's a new leader to that party. And I think it's reasonable to expect that there would be a federal election shortly afterwards with the leader of that Liberal Party running against the opposition Conservatives. Right now, the opposition Conservatives are very far ahead in the polls, about 20 points. And so if there were an election held today, almost certainly the Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, would come to office. But interestingly, the fact that Donald Trump has leveled these threats against Canada's economy and sovereignty has really changed the politics of this upcoming election. And whereas there were many issues that were part of the public debate and almost certainly will be when we do get to our election, the number one issue now is who can best manage the threat of Donald Trump over the next 4 years. And all of the party leaders expressed support for retaliatory tariffs if Donald Trump imposes tariffs on Canada.
Thank you very much. Roland Paris, Professor of International Affairs at the University of Ottawa and former advisor to Canada's Prime Minister. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back here on TVP World in just a moment with more news and features.